right, thanks for coming. I'm going to be talking today about some of my work with projecting the future distributions of mangroves in Florida and the Caribbean. And what I'm going to come at it today is kind of from a conservation angle, and I'm going to use some of this niche modeling and the projections to potentially set up some phylogeographic hypotheses testing in the future using that framework. I'll mainly talk about conservation today. So we take a look at these three species here. These are the three neotropical mangrove species that we see, black, red, and white mangroves. They all share a suite of characteristics that enable them to survive in the harsh environment of the coast. They also occur only at the coast. Furthermore, they provide immense ecosystem services such as filtering water and providing habitat and stabilizing the shoreline. So as such, it's really important that we conserve these three species, which are pretty vulnerable to the effects of climate change, such as sea level rise. So what I did was use present conditions and 2070 conditions under models of climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. And I compared the niche overlap within each species from the present to the future using Schoner's-D, which is a metric ranging from 0 to 1, where 0 is no niche overlap and 1 is complete niche overlap. So what we found in Florida is that there's relatively high niche overlap as shown by these D values between the present and the future in all three species. I should also point out that, as I said, there's no mangroves in inland Florida or in inland habitats, but what we're seeing is that the model in both the present and the future is picking up these areas like Lake Okeechobee and the St. Johns River where mangroves do not occur, but their model is just picking up, remember, abiotic factors. And so hypotheses in the literature are that biotic factors such as competition are why we're not seeing mangroves further inland. To summarize what we found from Florida, all three species have high niche overlap between the present and the future, and it looks like there's pretty stable suitable habitat in the future. And one thing that's interesting to note, we're kind of at the northern limit of these three species range, and what we see in the future is, for example, in the Panhandle and then the northern Atlantic Florida coast, there's potential for increase in suitable habitat to the north and a possible range expansion. So that kind of begs the question, what might happen to other coastal species in these areas? And for an example, I took this salt marsh species Baetis, which actually does quite well for itself. It's even invasive in some places. But what we see are really contrasting results to the mangroves. And we see that in the future projections, its suitable habitat is not doing nearly as well as evidenced by this D-score. So what we're seeing from a conservation aspect is that mangroves may tolerate the changing climate very well, but this could also have negative impacts on other species. And we can't forget that, importantly, these models are not taking into account certain things, such as potential overdevelopment. So if humans come and clear cut a certain area for development and get rid of all the mangroves in that suitable habitat area, the models are not taking into account. So we still need to be vigilant in our protection of mangroves. If we take a slightly broader picture look and move out to a larger scale, I did some modeling throughout the Caribbean in all three species, and what we're seeing are somewhat similar results in that suitable habitat between the present and the future either stays relatively stable or increases towards the future. But also point out that we see some potential range expansion in the north in all three species, particularly on the Gulf Coast and up the Atlantic coast. Then if we look again at the salt marsh species Baetis as an example, we see a decline in suitable habitat in the future for that species relative to mangroves, which good for mangroves, not necessarily good for salt marsh species. So to conclude, the suitable habitat in mangroves seems stable relative to some of these other species, such as salt marsh species. And then future directions, I'm collecting some genetic data and processing it now for red and white mangroves throughout the Caribbean. So these niche modeling results will be valuable as a hypothesis testing framework. I want to thank the following people. Thanks.